So it's St. Patrick's Day. Well, actually, it's the 18th now, the early hours of the 18th. If you are celebrating St. Patrick's Day, happy St. Patrick's Day. But it's likely to be quite different this year. I know Dublin has pulled off a lot of its events, as I would imagine other places with big Irish populations, New York City, Birmingham, Baltimore, San Francisco, places like that. Um, I want to talk about a very controversial but topical subject, not the coronavirus, although that's the number one issue in the world right now. I want to talk about identity politics, but I want to be a bit more specific with this one. This is a thing I've raised a few times, most recently, the last video I made on the Lawrence Fox situation. Now, we've just passed the 1 year anniversary of that awful attack in New Zealand. Um, by the Australian white nationalist Brenton Tarrant. Um, just to recap, this was the worst terrorist attack on New Zealand soil. 51 people killed in attacks at two mosques by a gunman who turned out to be an Australian national. This led to it was big news at the time because New Zealand's a particularly peaceful country, low crime rates, and certainly relatively little experience of terrorism compared to other countries. So it was pretty shocking. Um, the response was sort of national unity, condemnation of violence, intolerance, etc. But it also led to debates about how Islamist terrorism is viewed by comparison, because whilst that was an awful event, in the same year, of course, the following month was the Sri Lanka terrorist attack by ISIS fanatics, or at least a group affiliated with ISIS. Um, I still believe Islamist terror is the most pertinent form of terrorism around the world. I'm not talking about state terrorism, but in terms of terrorist groups. The world's most ruthless terrorist organizations are almost all Islamist in nature. Boko Haram, the Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, the remnants of Al Qaeda, the remnants of Islamic State. Incidentally, even ISIS apparently has issued guidelines to its members over COVID-19, so that says something. Although they say it's a message from God to punish infidel nations, but there you go. So if we look at the number of Islamist terrorist attacks around the world, it far surpasses the number of deadly white nationalist attacks. That's not to say that the white nationalist attacks should be downplayed. Um, Off the top of my head, there's a New Zealand attack. Um, there is the recent mass shooting in Germany in the city of Hanau earlier this year. There was the attack at the mosque in Quebec City in Canada a few years ago. There was, of course, the appalling attack in Norway in 2011. Um, there was the attack at the Pittsburgh Mosque, I believe it was last year or in 2018. So this is not something that is trivial. It's not something that's just a fringe issue. Recently there were arrests made and weapons found of far right groups in Germany. Um, Shortly before the attack at Hanau, and in Britain, groups like Combat 18 are very much active. Now, I've been very critical of identity politics, and I don't want to say a single word I've said. In fact, I would reiterate what I've said. I believe that identity politics in its worst form is toxic. This is not to say that I don't think people can be influenced by the culture of their background. Um, so, for example, the Nigerian diaspora in the United Kingdom will be, um, they will reflect on their Nigerian heritage, the Jamaican diaspora, Chinese diaspora, and so on. I think it is totally natural and understandable that people, particularly with that sort of dual identity, reflect on that joint identity, and it's something that's relevant to them. I mean, indeed, thinking of St. Patrick's Day, the Irish diaspora around the world are among the most sort of prominent in terms of expressing their cultural identity. Um, and that's all good. But the contention is that, oh, well, black people could do it, South Asian people could do it, Hispanic people could do it, and so forth. Why can't white people do it? Um, well, firstly, white people is it's a huge demographic. I mean, white Caucasians, um, by which I mean white Caucasians. That's because actually Indo-Iranian people are basically the same ethnic group as white Caucasians, but it's different skin pigmentation. Um, White people are a huge demographic. That's the same black people. But you know, the cultural differences between, say, a black Brazilian and a black Somalian would be vast. In fact, I saw a video that said the actual genetic differences between people in West Africa and people in East Africa are greater than the genetic differences between Indians and Germans. So that's quite incredible when you think about it. Um, so that's why we need to be careful about talking about black people or white people in these sort of overly generalized terms. But it is irrefutable that there is a growing sort of white nationalism, and it's been seen in the United States as well. Now, apologists for this phenomenon say, well, it's a backlash against the woke sort of ideology, and it's a backlash against liberal immigration policies in Western Europe, for example. I'm pretty critical of the sort of approach, for example, Angela Merkel took in 2015. I think that was incredibly reckless. I also think that there's times that the left, and I use the term loosely, can be very short-sighted with this because it's all very well being open-minded and wanting to help the world's most vulnerable people, but if you have a knee-jerk reaction every time someone expresses concerns about mass immigration to say, oh, well, that's racism, then that just doesn't help the situation because there are legitimate issues here. There are legitimate issues about integration, about cultural values, and so on. There are, and there has to be candid discussion about that. I really do not like the way some on the left try to silence debate with smearing people as racists. It's nauseating, in fact. But, and this is a big but, that is not to say there isn't genuine racism out there. And I just want to put this on record. If you endorse any sort of white nationalism, if you endorse the sort of conspiracy theories such as the white genocide theory, so called, you know, I can't physically go around blocking people, but please do not come to my channel. Please do not. I don't want your support. I don't want your endorsement. Okay, that ideology is as alien to me as Islamism is. Um, and I think there is an unhealthy notion that the sort of extremist white nationalist ideology that we're seeing, oh, well, that's just a natural response to the Islamist attacks. But that's short sighted because it's been a problem before the sort of rise of Islamism in Western Europe. I mean, look at the Soho nail bombing back in 1999, 21 years ago. Single man campaign of terror. David Copeland. He killed three people. He wounded hundreds, literally hundreds. He was targeting the black and gay community of London. Um, he killed three people. I understand two of them were straight. One of the victims was a child. There's a famous photograph of a little baby with one of his nails through its skull. The baby survived, but it was harrowing. Um, so Combat 18, as far as I'm concerned, are a bunch of dangerous neo-Nazi thugs, and I absolutely support the police in cracking down on them. And anyone that condones them, I do not want your support. It's not just Combat 18, there's other groups, but they're one of the worst. These people are neo Nazis. They're not just patriots who are defending their country, they're neo Nazis who support an ideology that we fought against. Let's not forget 68,000 British civilians died in World War II in the struggle against this ideology. That's why I think it's so perverse that they have the audacity to claim that they're patriots. Um, I think there's legitimate anger to be had over, for example, the grooming gangs cover up. I think there's legitimate anger to be had over the political correctness around Islamist extremism. And the Labour Party is infuriating in how they haven't learned from this. Their expulsion of Sir Trevor Phillips is a disgrace. But I do not subscribe to this view that it's a binary sort of situation. You either support one extreme or you support the other. Um, I think it's perfectly compatible to oppose Islamic extremism, to take a practical approach on immigration issues, a real world, um, realistic approach to that, whilst not endorsing blood and soil nationalism. And I do say blood and soil nationalism. I had quite a testy debate with a woman who was claiming that I was a liberal because I took issue with blood and soil nationalism. I don't consider myself a liberal. Um, but I do take issue with that because what it comes down to is this notion that only white people are the indigenous people. Now, if someone has lived here generation after generation after generation, and they have integrated into our society and they're a British citizen, they are not second class citizens. They're no less British than a white person. So the fact of the matter is, whilst immigration as we know it today is a relatively recent phenomenon from the decolonization period onwards, Britain has always been an open nation. We've always been an island seafaring nation, and we went out and we built an empire. So this idea of Britain's a white nation, let's keep it for the indigenous people, it's just incredibly stupid because it's never really been that way. It certainly hasn't for a long time now. And I can think some of the most patriotic Britons I know are ethnic minority Britons. In fact, some of the most right wing Britons I know are Indian and Pakistani Britons. So I think people need to be very careful about what they are endorsing. And I think some people are being a bit naive and they're thinking, oh, well, these groups, what are they doing wrong? They're just opposing the grooming gangs. You need to dig a bit beneath the surface to see what sort of ideology these people are promoting. Dig beneath the surface, and you'll see it's all very well today saying they're against the grooming gangs. Scratch beneath the surface. 25 years ago, they would have been putting in the windows of Indian shopkeepers. They would have been promoting Mein Kampf. So let's just be sensible. Um, I mentioned, well, I'm going to call this video White Identity Politics. Um, Here's also a problem though. If woke bullies, that is to say, those on the left who insist on the sort of narrative that they had over the Lawrence Fox situation, that is to say, trying to demonize a man, trying to destroy his livelihood for no other reason than saying uh, that to target him as a white man was in itself a racist thing. What's actually happening here is a sort of white identity politics is being forced on people. So, for example, I'm a white man. I don't see that as an achievement, and I certainly don't go around with this mentality that I'm proud to be a white man. However, if someone tries to make me feel guilty for being a white man, I will take issue with that. So, in that sense, I think it's kind of the two sides are feeding off one another. I think the ugly side of white nationalism is growing, unfortunately, but it's partly growing because of the ridiculous attitude of the regressive left, that they're endorsing the sort of ethnic minority identity politics, which is, oh, well, you're constantly victims of white privilege, and it's promoting a victimhood narrative. In the end of the day, identity politics, if it's just about kind of looking at your culture, if it's about looking at the nuances of mixed identity, I've no problem with that. I mean, I do maintain a degree of identity politics being from where I'm from, but I think the problem lies in when you start getting a chip on your shoulder and you start thinking that every shortcoming in life is because, oh, well, it must be because I'm black, it must be because I'm Asian, or indeed, it must be because I'm white. So, where we get white identity politics, we are going to start to see situations where maybe some white men are going to have a chip on the shoulder as well. But then again, when you do get policies that actually, I read in the Times earlier about a civil servant who claims that well, no, excuse me, not a civil servant, a serving police officer who claimed he suffered racial discrimination under Priti Patel. Now, I'm not going to go into details on that case, it's an ongoing thing, but it just shows that there may well be situations where actually white people are going to start saying, well, if we have laws in this country against discrimination, why the hell shouldn't I make use of those laws if I feel I'm being discriminated against? So this is just there's probably nothing more toxic than racial tensions, nothing, including sexual tensions between men and women. I think that racial tensions are just because they force people to be tribalized. And that is such a pity because we're all individuals. Um, and there are many, many white people out there who are absolutely, I would have nothing in common with them. I would find a lot more in common with um, some of my black or Chinese or South Asian friends than I would with those people. But because of identity politics, people are pushed into a corner. So we really need to reject that sort of thinking. All of us. We all have a responsibility to do it. So white identity politics, things like, for example, saying there's a white genocide going on, that is to say, there's some big New World Order conspiracy to replace white populations. This is coming straight from neo-Nazi playbooks, and it's baseless. It's utterly baseless. Yes, the demographic situation is changing in this country, but not in that sort of. To use the term genocide, I think is grotesque. Genocide is what happened in Rwanda. Genocide is what happened twice in Burundi. Genocide is what happened in the Soviet Union, in Nazi Germany, of course. To use genocide in the context of immigration to predominantly white countries is ridiculous. Um, it's just so absurd. So anyway, that's my thoughts. You can disagree as if you like, you can agree. Um, but if you endorse the sort of mentality that there's some new world order out to kill off white people, I'm sorry, but I don't want anything to do with your support. I'm not going to censor, but I don't want that sort of thinking on my channel. That is not my school of thought. It's not my politics. And I don't want to be associated with people who have those politics. So leave it there. But I do think that the woke left, if they are concerned about this, instead of calling everyone who disagrees with them a racist, they need to just tone it down and, you know, recognize that there are nuances to this. And the idea that someone who's concerned about immigration is in the same category as a neo Nazi, fucking, they need to really get a grip.